Okay. This is about an hour. We go about an hour if that's what you're gonna ask. We do.
Okay, and it's we're just recording, right? Or are we live?
Oh no, we're live. We're live.
Okay. Okay.
And so yeah, we're live on YouTube, Facebook, and Rumble. But
okay.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Typical Skeptic Podcast. I'm really excited about my guest today. We're going to be talking about Roswell, it's still fascinating because it's still covered up to this day. In a bold and groundbreaking approach to the most iconic UFO mystery of all time, today's episode of the Typical Skeptic Podcast brings Christopher Johnston, JD, a top tier. I gotta ask him what JD means. I think it means justice. What does that mean, Chris? JD?
Juris Doctorate. So that's the degree that you get.
Juris Doctorate. Okay, because I knew you were a lawyer.
Right.
Yeah. And he's a top-tier trial attorney and lifelong UFO researcher. Chris is the author of the powerful new book, Roswell, The Truth on Trial, The Evidence Speaks. You decide. In it, he reconstructs the infamous 1947 crash as the full-blown courtroom drama where you are the juror. Johnston blends decades of witness testimony, affidavits, and classified research with his deep legal expertise to present Roswell like never before. Was it really a weather balloon, or has the government spent 80 years hiding evidence of extraterrestrial contact? Chris is not just a lawyer. He's a certified space and law astrobiology, a contributor to MUFON, and a founding member of the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. He's written on deep theories like infraterrestrial hypothesis and brings a razor-sharp intellect to the disclosure movement. And this is Law and Order meets X-Files, a trial for the truth behind Roswell. Will the evidence finally speak enough to break the truth embargo? And with all that said, I'd like to give him a big warm welcome to the show for the first time. Chris, thank you so much for coming on. How are you?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you're a member of MUFON, and I know you're an attorney, and but tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you got into ufology.
Sure. It goes back to, I'll out myself a little bit. I think it helps to put things into decades. I'm 55. I was born in 69. So my little kid years were in the 70s. And, some kids bonded with their dad with baseball, and some bonded with the cars. I bonded with my dad through his love of sci-fi. It was always on. That was the dinner table conversation. It was, this and that. And for a lot of your listeners that may not know, granted, Roswell itself, the incident happened in 1947. It really didn't become this cultural touchstone until the 1970s when Stanton Friedman really kind of started digging into it. So my first exposure and continued exposure was with my dad, and he had a particular interest in Roswell given the timing when it really got hot and entered the mainstream. So that's where it started. And then, like a lot of us from there,
that's awesome.
So just took it on my own from that point forward with a lot of, reading anything I could get my hands on, watching anything I could get my eyes on. And I took it from there.
Have you ever had your own experience?
Okay, I have. And I always preface it this way, because just like when we do get to the book, one of the purposes behind my book was to try to get folks to maybe think a little more critically about things rather than just seeing the headline or form our own idea, like a line, and I'm guilty of it too. And so when I recount my own experience, I can make it very fact-based, but when I do that, it really kind of loses a lot of its luster. But I think that's what happens in society. So in 1990, I was but a young budding manager at this place I was working at the time. And so I got all books on management and things like that. And there was a work party coming. And one of the things that's recommended in this book was where you should show up, have one drink, and then leave. So you've made your appearance, and your employees appreciate it, but you're not staying there and kind of wrecking their good time. So I went to this bar, and this was a nice kind of high-end, fancy evening out. I had one beer and I left. I have witnesses that had me leaving the bar at 9:00 and a roommate that had me coming home at 3 a.m. So those two things are fact. So I clearly had missing time to the tune of about 6 to 7 hours. That's also fact. But as far as what happened, I'm kind of left the rest of us, let my imagination kind of wander. So that, for good or bad, that's the closest to any sort of experience that I have had. And it's a weird one. And maybe someday, if time ever allows, I'd like to do some regressive hypnosis and see what the heck happened there.
What, did you see a UFO that night as well? I think we forgot to mention that part. Or did you spot like any kind of UFO activity?
No, and unfortunately, that's what I'm saying.
Missing.
Right, just missing time. Wow. And that's all I can prove is the missing time. And and I didn't see anything that I recall. I wasn't examined that I recall, but I do know. Left at 9 a.m., was seen coming home somewhere between 3 and 4 in the morning with no recall of that time in between.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, what made you want to write about Roswell? Like, because it seems like it's I guess it's like the start of the truth embargo, right? Like it's what started the big lie for 80 years of the government, basically, with propaganda against us about UFOs. Is that what you say, or how do you feel?
Yes, I would agree with that. At least, well, I guess that would be a truth embargo. I was going to say, at least to what is known to us, the you and the me, of the world, not some deep state or, some government actor. Yes, Roswell was really the first thing of which a lot of us became aware that it appears as though things were being, hidden and covered up. And the reason, back to your original question on that, the reason I selected Roswell, there's a handful of reasons. One, tip of the cap to my dad. Two, it was the incident that I knew already going in, knew the most about. And thirdly, I knew that there would be enough source material out there for me to write an entire book about. I considered some different options when I was putting pen to paper. I was thinking Betty and Barney Hill. I was thinking Travis Walton, but he's kind of been done. But a lot of those, especially like Benny and Barney Hill, there isn't the same amount of witness testimony and legal documents and government involvement. So some of the cases that I chose not to write about, it was really just more by virtue of what I knew would be available to actually, put together and have enough to make a reasonable and good book.
Yeah. And I think you'll find this interesting. You would probably get along with this guy too. There's a guy who wrote a book similar to yours, but it's a little bit different. Like he did a Roswell courtroom thing where you kind of decide, but then he included the Brooklyn Bridge incident and the abduction. Linda, the one that Bud Hopkins wrote about, and then he also included Rendlesham Forest. And I can't. His name's John Steiger. He was on my show before, and that's I was like, wow, you guys have similar books, But I think it's fascinating that you wrote about the presenting Roswell in a courtroom as fact or fiction or what the real evidence was, and what do you think about that? What is your take on what happened?
Okay, well. And I get asked that question, of course, every interview I do, and it's an absolutely fair question, and I will answer it. But let me point out in the book, when I took really the position of really more of the judge in putting the book together. I make no opinions in the book. The book, the story of Roswell, the narrative of it is told via the testimony. Okay. And so I just wanted the pure testimony just as was. Now, of course, I had to write the direct and the cross questions to match up with the testimony, but I worked really hard to keep it about as neutral as I could, and that was by design, and that's the purpose of the book. So at the same time, I also had to exclude certain witnesses who would have been bizarreville way one way or way the other way. I tried to get more witnesses that were constant throughout the story and would help tell the story along. So that was my neutral positioning. What do I really think happened? I think an extraterrestrial craft crashed. That part I'm confident about. Whether there were alien bodies or not, that currently is a bridge too far for me. And I do not hold again. One thing I've learned, in my years, I don't really doubt anybody's experiences or what their opinions are. All we can do is look at the evidence and people will draw their own conclusions. So based on the evidence, I'm not on board entirely with the extraterrestrial bodies. I am on board with the craft.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it seems like people tried to say that they took the bodies to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Like, do you feel like there's some how would you say this in legal terms? That there's not enough evidence there that and more of it's like hearsay.
Right. And that is a huge problem. In society, just generally speaking. Right. And in writing the book, we all know there is no, at least again, that you and I are going to get our hands on. There's no physical evidence. Right. And there is a lot of hearsay. Yeah. And so throughout my book, I did, because I also wanted my book to serve as a bit of a primer on trial procedure and what really happens. So, for example, typically hearsay, I can't sit down and go, well, Bob told me, right? Objection, hearsay. So there's a few places in the book where I had to rely on hearsay in order to move the story along. I had the attorneys object and then state what there's exceptions to hearsay as well. So although I did have to use some, I tried to handle it properly, in the courtroom setting. But so to your point, a hot topic right now, of course, is disclosure. And this ties in right to your question. So the big question about disclosure at the congressional hearings, right? Everyone's kind of hot about the congressional hearings. Well, when I listen to those congressional hearings, I hear a whole bunch of nothing and a whole bunch of hearsay and a whole bunch of, well, I talked to 40 people and they said, right? There's very, very little. Now, there will be the, hey, maybe I can tell you later if we go into a skiff, that kind of thing. But again, the information that the public, the yous and me's of the world are getting, it's not a lot. It doesn't, would it tip the scales of justice, whether people really want it to or hope it does or what have you, consider it in that courtroom setting. Would anyone be allowed to sit down in a civil trial and say, well, they said? No. So then a guy like me, I sit back, and this is what I want other people to do, then push harder for real evidence. Let's not just be placated with this, oh, well, they're doing the hearings. If you really pay attention to what's coming out, not a whole lot.
Yeah, I agree. Well, yeah, it's true. It's true. And this brings up another good question. Is that kind of why you joined the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance? Because you wanted to push disclosure forward or hope for disclosure?
In part. And I am, I'll come back to my actual thoughts on disclosure in a minute, but the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance, as you probably know, their primary focus is to try to have some continuity in the storytelling about aliens and extraterrestrials and that kind of thing. So the gentleman that founded it, Dan Harari, he's bringing together kind of the creatives on one side, so your actors and producers and directors, and then more your research-oriented folks like me and like him, and to work together so that, movie A isn't saying, hey, this disclosure is coming and movie B is doing this. Let's kind of get on the same train together. And so that was my interest in the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance. Really good organization, a lot of people, and a lot of people in positions that are likely to be able to, get a little bit more out of the government than I might be able to. And I don't know, are you familiar with attorney Danny Sheehan and what he's doing?
Yeah, I haven't met him yet, but I'm familiar with him. But what is he doing right now? What's he? He's always seems to be deep in disclosure.
Yeah, and that is his right now. That's his hot item. But for your listeners, Danny Sheehan is a very, very well-known, very well-respected civil litigator, and he was involved, like the Aaron Brockovich case, a lot of these kind of environmental torts is what we call them. The 3Ms of the world polluting the rivers. That was Mr. Sheehan's real area. And he's had tremendous success over the years. And he's also long been involved in the UFO project. So he has started an organization, I believe it's called the Paradigm Institute, based in DC, right down the street from Capitol. And he is going down and they're working on drafting bills regarding disclosure with the very players who are involved. So Mr. Harari and the Hollywood Disclosure Alliance is sort of taking that creative angle to it. And Mr. Sheehan is taking the legalese approach to it. So there's a lot of things moving forward on disclosure, but I think we're old enough to see lots of things being pushed forward and nothing ever coming out of it. So we shall see, but those are those two organizations and what they have going on.
Yeah, I want to say also Paradigm is Stephen Bassett's organization, right? I've interviewed him a couple of times. But is Sheehan a part of Paradigm as well? I wasn't sure.
Yeah, I believe Sheehan is with Paradigm, and if I'm getting, as you know, there's lots of groups out there. It can get tough to keep everyone straight. But I thought Danny was doing Paradigm. But again, I would step back if I misspoke.
Yeah, but this is fascinating. I was going to say, so let me get to my questions here. I'm looking down. In your book, I will get to the book. How did you go about selecting the witnesses and structuring the trial? Like, did you use like the famous people like Mac Brazel and Jesse? What's his name? Jesse Marcel. Why is it escaping me? Oh my God, I should know this. Yeah, Jesse Marcel. I interviewed Jesse. I interviewed his grandson. You know, but it's like I forget some of this. Yeah,
like I said, the witnesses that I chose were, for the most, I got a couple small name folks that some people might go, I haven't heard of that one, but yes, if you think, well, a trial is a story. Right. So typically, like if I was I am in a courtroom right now, but this is my own private courtroom. But if I were in courtroom right now in trial, what the trial lawyer is doing is you're telling a story. Right. But now, granted, you're telling it from a point of persuasion and a point of advocacy, but you're still telling a story, and it's got to have a beginning and a middle and an end. So
yeah,
just following that not even legalese, just that basic format. Well, we got to start with Mac Brazel because he found the stuff. We got to include your Jesse Marcel's because he was very important in several ways we can get to in a bit. We have to include General Roger Ramey because he was involved in the retraction. So there were certain people that were the only way they would make the cut is if what they had to say about it would continue to advance the story somewhat linearly. So that's how I chose it. So make up a witness. Oh, Mike Smith. Well, Mike Smith was 10 and he was over on this hill. And he said, okay, Mike Smith isn't making the cut because we already have other witnesses. And there's even rules about that. It's called duplicative testimony. So I followed the legal rules and just basic storytelling to choose who my witnesses were going to be.
I love that. I love how you, and it was like, it's kind of like you took something you knew about, like the law, and then you implemented it. It's one of your passions, with ufology. And I really think that's cool. you know?
Thank you. And you know what? You're the...
Yeah, it's let me see here. What other... Sorry.
No, that's okay.
There's a little bit of a delay. Oh no, go ahead. It's okay. I'm sorry. I was just waiting for you to respond. I think of another question. So, what piece of evidence or testimony in the book would you personally consider the smoking gun for the extraterrestrial hypothesis?
Okay, so let me explain that just to hear. So the way that I set up the trial, like any other civil trial, you would have. We'll just pick a car accident. You run into Sally, and I represent Sally. So in that scenario, she would be the plaintiff. You would be the defendant. So you're defending yourself. So for purposes of the book, I changed it up a little bit, and I have the believers and I have the skeptics. So your believers are going to be your plaintiffs traditionally, and the skeptics would be the defense. And again, that's a tough question. Of course, I get it asked every time, but by virtue of selecting somewhat neutral witnesses, right, it made it a little bit tough. But I can tell you that a lot of people ask it this way. I believe that the best witness for the believers, okay, would be Mac Brazel himself. And Mr. Brazel is the gentleman that first happened upon the debris on the ranch and rounded some of it up. He would be, one, obviously first in time, so he's a good witness. And two, he had, best that I ever learned, no dog in this fight whatsoever. And someone like that makes a great witness. You can't impeach on bias. You can't impeach on financial gain. It's simply, I'm making this up, but I can imagine. It's just simply a good old boy on the stand. Not even particularly interested to be there, but he's got to be there. He just wants to tell his story and get the heck out of there. Witnesses like that can often carry the day because that's what most of your jurors are. They don't necessarily love being there, and they're going to hear the stuff. So for the believers, I would take Mac Brazel all day as my number one witness. On the skeptic side, that's a little bit tougher. But I give the victory in that one. The best witness for the skeptics would be General Ramey. And the reason for that is some of it gets into, you lose the human factor in a book. When somebody's sitting on the stand and the jury can look at them and hear them and smell them, the whole bit. So again, only imagining, but General Roger Ramey, first of all, he was a general, which means he was no dummy. He's going to know more probably than anyone else in that courtroom, certainly about military procedure and that kind of thing. He'll be up there in his full uniform. And when pushed, about, not just in my book, but when he was pushed about, well, what about that initial press release that said that a disc was recovered? He did the smartest thing he could do. He said, yep, it was a mistake, and just owned it. So you put a guy like that with all that credibility on the stand and just looking you right in the eyes and go, yeah, I know it was said, but we were wrong. He could be a tough one to get over for the believers. So those are my two favorite as a real life trial lawyer. I'm putting this case on tomorrow. Those would be the two that I'd be most interested in getting.
I love that. It's so interesting. And did you presented, and okay, let me see here. As an experienced trial attorney, how do you think the public would respond if Roswell case were actually brought to trial today?
Yep. I think people would. I think people would like it. Right now, as we were already touching on, we have congressional hearings going. We have politicians, high-ranking politicians from other countries, people talking about this. So I think, I would imagine, your guess is as good as mine. It just seems that would be very well received because, another thing, about the book, we're not seeing new evidence on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly. It's everything that we have for the most part. Kind of the most recent quote unquote evidence is kind of in the early 90s. So it makes it challenging. But I could hear potential jurors saying, "Oh yeah, it's about time. Hey, maybe we can figure it. Let's get this stuff presented without a bunch of hoo-ha and hoopla, and let the people decide." Now, whatever that's worth, people for the most part, I think, have already decided what they think one way or the other. But boy, it seems to me that would be a hit.
I love that. Yeah, that makes it. Yeah, and what I was going to say is, do you think it needs to be? Do you think like it should be brought to trial today? Like, do you think like that it would be a good idea for them to revisit the Roswell case? Like, and could they even do something like that? Do you think?
Yeah, your second question there kind of sets up the first. There would have to be so many variances from actual trial procedure, like the rules of evidence and all, about the only, you could do it, so let's go book the auditorium at University of New Mexico. And in case anyone's listening, I will represent the believers. I will do that pro bono. Still, you really couldn't do it for reals right now, right? We have no physical evidence. We have a lot of hearsay, but if people understood going in that, exceptions were going to be made and we're going to have to work around that kind of stuff, it could be done. But again, it would be just a lot, kind of like my book being presented live as opposed to a real trial. That said, there is so much information on Roswell. If I had wanted to, I could have written 10,000 pages, and multiple volumes and that kind of thing. So if a couple of lawyers were really going to, put this on, about another year and a half of, digging and really putting it together, it could be put together pretty tight, I think.
This is so interesting. Like, okay, I got another really good question. In the trial structure of your book, how is the military's explanation of a weather balloon cross-examined? Like, what cracks appear in that official story?
Sure.
Or is there?
No, there is. I'll tell you, it's kind of funny. So again, back to some trial procedure stuff. The plaintiffs have the burden of proof, meaning we actually have to prove something. Defense lawyers, the intellectually honest ones, will tell you it's much easier to be a defense attorney because you got to do is poke a couple of holes, right? You don't have to prove up the whole case. You just got to cause some problems. As a result, a lot of lawyers, myself included, we really like writing up, questions for cross-exam. Nobody is clean and squeaky enough that there's not something, right? So going back to your question, which, full transparency, I've lost the nut of your question there. Do you want to rephrase that?
Oh, you froze. Are you still there?
No, I'm still here. I was speaking, and then I mentioned that I lost the core of your last question and asked if you could rephrase that.
Oh, so I was saying, like, okay, so like in the structure book, like how the military explains their explanation of a weather balloon, how is it cross-examined? Sure. And are there cracks that appear in that story?
Yes, so there are cracks. One of the gentlemen by the name of Philip Klass, who was an astronomer and heavily involved in looking at items like this. He went on in a couple of prior interviews talking about his investigation, and based on his investigation, he determined that it was a weather balloon. Well, come to find out, Yeah, so what you do, you let the defense call him, and he'll go on and on about, oh yeah, and it's this, that, and the other thing. His investigation consisted of touching it, right? He touched some material. Okay, let's talk about this big fancy investigation. Here's, Mr. Class. Yes, let's do that. Did you run any metallurgy on it? Well, no. Did you, you just start setting them up on all the things that haven't been done. But instead, you told the jury you touched it. Is that right? Well, yeah. Okay. And you kind of leave it hanging. So, and that's another thing when, as I was saying before, people need to be critical. If somebody's saying, oh, I inspected this, why don't let's define inspection, right? That kind of thing. So that was one good angle to going after Class. Another thing with General Ramey, and I do understand that I said it was smart of him, I think, just to own it and say it was a mistake. So now if he's being crossed, we will have heard a whole bunch about his credentials, the importance of the 508th Nuclear Bomb Unit, his credentials, and then we are supposed to believe that he made such a silly mistake, right? So you go after, and him, it's a little bit, you're using his credibility against him, right? And then you get into the Project Mogul stuff, which, a lot of people go on and say, well, then there's even debate if Project Mogul was even occurring, in July of 47, and if it was, where specifically. So there are cracks when you dig in. Every defendant or skeptic in this case within my book, and I guarantee you could put anybody on the stand and I will be able to cross them with something. So again, it was the timing of the weather balloons. It was really a guy like you is going to make a mistake. Jesse Marcel, he did something kind of interesting from a legal perspective. So for your listeners, a lot of people know this, but some don't. So Jesse Marcel was the first gentleman on the base to have this material brought to him. And then that's when the press release came out saying the disc was recovered. And then the next thing we know, we have Major Marcel with Roger Ramey, and Marcel later saying, well, this wasn't the same stuff, that kind of thing. All right. So in my book, and obviously this is how I would do it, he talks about the reason, this is coming a little bit from a point of advocacy, but poor Jesse Marcel, he just had to go along with what he was told because he follows orders and he's a good military man, and orders, right? And that's why he did what he did. Well, we also know that there were not orders saying, hey, take some of this stuff to your house, by the way. Right. And we know that happened. So you start using those inconsistencies. Well, you want the jury to believe that you're big Mr. Rule follower on the one hand, but on the other hand, you're willing to take this classified material and put it in your car and drive and show it to other people. Right. So there'd be another niche. But interestingly, by him doing that, he also created a couple additional witnesses. So although he shouldn't have done it, he did give himself, on cross-exam, a little bit of a problem. It's somewhat outweighed by the fact that he created two more witnesses who could say, yeah, I saw this stuff and I touched this stuff.
I agree. It's interesting, right? I mean, it's so hard to say like what really happened, I mean, and then I have so many questions I want to ask you, what's your opinion? What's your personal opinion on Philip Klass? Because I'll just tell you, I'm a big proponent for the abduction phenomena. I'm not saying that it completely happened, but it seems to me millions of people around the world claim to have had some kind of abduction experience, and now it seems like the government wants to sweep it under the rug. It seems like I just found out Steven Spielberg had a series in 2002 called Taken, and it was about the abduction phenomenon. I'm currently watching it, but which I find fascinating because it seemed like he was always ahead of time, with the stuff that he put out. But when I think about people like Philip Klass, Philip Klass always seemed to he went after the Travis Waltons. He went after the experiencers. He was very, very skeptical. Do you have a personal opinion on Philip Klass or no? And also to piggyback on that, do you have an opinion on the abduction phenomena?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So can't take the lawyer out of me. I got my legal pad here and my notes going. When it comes to Philip Klass, about him specifically,
That's okay.
I don't really have an opinion. Other than this, I don't appreciate anybody that comes out from either the standpoint of advocacy or the standpoint of skepticism when to me it seems inappropriate. Shouldn't we come at it from a standpoint of neutrality and then take in the facts and listen to the evidence and weigh things? The jury selection process is called voir dire, and it's French for speaks the truth. And that's the time when you find out, are these people, can they be neutral? Yeah. Hey, do you got lawn signs? Do you got bumper sticker? All this kind of stuff. The Philip Klasses of the world and the other folks that come from this skeptical viewpoint, they wouldn't even make the jury, right? Because they already have formulated, and I'm not saying all of them or him particularly, but it seems to me a lot of skeptics and, they have their point that they already believe, and they're going to do anything they can to prove them their own selves correct. So Klass all the skeptics out there. And in some regards, the diehard believers, they're almost worse, in their how adamant they are. But again, you peel back and you look what folks are relying on, and it's not that great. So Klass, no, but I wish everyone came from more of a standpoint of neutrality. And then your question on abductions, my opinion on it, I believe that it has happened. I think it is happening. There's too many people. There's too many reports. And as we all do, I'm sure we have those little sub stories of categories that we just love. I have not heard anyone explain Travis Walton to me with any kind of believability. So you get these things out there, they can't be explained, and I don't believe that everybody's out there lying about it. Now, there could be an element of, I believe you believe it, which is different. But there is certainly, I believe, something going on, and there is something to the abduction phenomenon. I believe that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, that's. I think it's really interesting when you start to dig into it. It really is. Let me see here. I have more questions about the Roswell. I'm going back in my notes too, so just bear with. Okay. Did you find any lesser known affidavits or testimonies that strengthen the extraterrestrial case? Like something that maybe we might not have known about, like a lesser known affidavit testimony that strengthened the case for it happening.
Well, and I don't know. I did include several affidavits in my book, and I don't know that these are lesser known, but on the behalf of the believers, enter Walter Haut. And Mr. Haut was the public information officer at the Army Air Force Base, at the time that this happened. And Mr. Haut, I might have my years slightly wrong, but I think this is correct. Pardon me. He executed an affidavit, so he signed it. He executed an affidavit in 1993 talking about, roughly, loosely, his experience at Roswell. So that was affidavit number one. And I'll kind of leave alone what was in it for a minute. Affidavit number 2 came 9 years later after that. So that would have been 93 to 2002. And let's remember, he's talking about an event from 1947. Okay. So people on the believer side like to cheer for Walter Haut.
Yeah.
Look at it. He said that there were bodies. Okay, well, you asked, a little bit on what would I do with that on cross? Well, I'll tell you, because Mr. Howard is the public information officer, the way I have him set up in the book, he's talking about why is public information important? Well, you want it to be accurate. You want people to have details. Okay, fair enough. And then you executed this affidavit. Yep, I did. And then you got this other one in 02, yeah. And it wasn't until 2002 in that affidavit that he first referenced extraterrestrial bodies. All right, well, query, did you not just tell us that the role of the public information officer is to provide all this detail and info so people know? Okay, well, yeah. And you'd also agree with me, people's memories don't get better over time, they get worse over time. Yeah, you got to agree with that. So tell me then, when you did an affidavit in 1993, you just completely failed to mention anything about extraterrestrial bodies. You talk about burying the lead. I mean, come on. And then it's in 2002, all of a sudden, this pops up and everybody gloms onto the 2002 one and takes it off and running. So those are the affidavits that, I really do think most people would read those kind of for what they are. As a trial attorney, it's kind of bad news when you're changing or you're adding to a document and you're adding, it's like a personal injury case and somebody says they have a sore neck and then 9 years later, it's almost the equivalent of saying, oh, both my legs were amputated. Well, why were we not? You would think that would have maybe come up the first time.
You're adding to the end. You're adding to, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that's, Wow, I never knew about that. That's really interesting.
And then you get in there and you play with, bias. And these, I'm not going to draw it off the top of my head, but for some folks, it certainly was financially worth their while for the Roswell story to continue on, right? People are writing books about their experience. People are doing this. And when you look at the financial incentives of any kind of witness and anything, that's always a big red flag. That's not to say you're getting paid so you're lying, but it certainly could go to, I wonder if his bias is financial gain.
No. Wow. Yeah. Like that, because a lot of people wrote a lot of books off Roswell. Well, yeah. I mean, they've made even tourism off of Roswell, right? Like, I mean, they've actually literally made people go to Roswell, New Mexico every year for a festival, and it's like a big deal, I don't know, it's that's why I love it though. It's so interesting, like weighing out all that. That's why I wanted to have you on the show, because when people start to think about this, it's interesting, when you present all the facts, it really leaves you me I mean, obviously I believe something happened, right? But at the same time, you do present a lot of facts where it could be oh, well, maybe somebody is maybe this was somewhat fabricated or something, something was not right,
Right.
I don't know.
And on that point, I'd like people to know, in my book, all the testimony that's in there, I drew from previous interviews given by those witnesses. So I didn't make up any of the answers. Now, granted, like I said, I had to write the questions correctly so that the answers, would fall in line. But the answers given by the witnesses did not come out of the mind of Chris Johnston. They came out of, previous interviews and previous affidavits and being on the TV and all these different things all these folks had done. So, which really lends a lot towards the credibility of it, stripping away, now people still said outlandish things, but by focusing only on what had previously been said, also lends another level of credibility to this quote unquote trial.
I agree 100%. Yeah. Let me go back to my questions here, and let me see here. Did you think about the 94 and 97 Air Force case closed reports that for some reason the government shut the whole case down, or supposedly they did?
Are you talking the 93 Roswell case closed report? That one?
Yeah.
I I'm aware of it. I've read bits, pieces of it. I intentionally kind of stayed away. Had I used that report, the 93 Air Force case closed, it would be a totally different book. And, it'd be a totally different book. Who knows what the quote unquote jurors would do. But yeah, there was that's where we find out, oh, by the way, the crash test dummies, right? Well, okay, government, it started out there was nothing. And now we're all the way up to crash test dummies. And it started from nothing. And now we're up to weather balloons, So, at some point, I didn't include it. I'm aware of it. And at some point, that wouldn't be a bad short article either.
I got a great one. So this is one of my last questions. How would you handle the burden of proof in a real world disclosure trial? Would it rest on the government or the experiencers?
I think it would probably, again, just a couple of guys pipe dreaming here. I think it would probably rest with the experiencers, because the government being the government and seeing what we have or have not seen for the last, 100 years, it certainly seems to me that the truth would be coming, out of the experiencers, as opposed to the government. But if I may quickly, my opinion on disclosure, which is as good or as bad as the next guy's opinion, I'm inclined to think that disclosure is going to come via the extraterrestrials themselves, as opposed to anything, at least the United States government is going to disclose. I think there will be an event, something that will occur that can't be denied, or if attempts are made to deny it, everybody's going to kind of throw up a middle finger and go, yeah, I saw it myself. I don't need you, to disclose this for me. That, maybe that's a little bit of optimism, because I like very clear answers, right? And who knows what disclosure would even look like today? Say the government, we're going to disclose. Well, what's that consist of? And they're setting the parameters. Wouldn't we rather have the experiencers kind of setting the parameters, even if they seem outlandish? Let's talk about it all, not just what the government wants us to know or wants us to talk about.
I love that. That's a good point. Yeah. Well, this was awesome. Is there anything else you want people to know about the book before we finish up for today? And yeah, thanks, sir, so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. This was really fun. If people are looking for the book, easiest way to get it, and a bit of a shameless plug, my law firm website is lawgroupofiowa.com. If you go to lawgroupofiowa.com, halfway down the homepage, you will see a big red button and a picture of Roswell, the truth on trial, and the button will say, buy Chris's book here. You just click there and it takes you right to the right page. Or, of course, it's available on Amazon. And I hope people do get it and get some, maybe they look at one thing a little more critical than they otherwise would have. And to me, that's a win. That's success. Great.
I agree. Well, thank you so much, Chris. It was so nice meeting you, and thank you for taking your time to speak with us today. And I'd love to have you back on again. Until next time.
Great. Thank you very much. Bye.